Welcome to the Microsoft AI Tour. In this session, we're going to walk through Copilot Ready, strategy, data, and security. I'm Brian Wofford, a principal PM in the customer advocacy group, and I'll be walking you through this. In this session, we have 7 items on our agenda. First, we're going to talk about the welcome and framing. We're going to talk about discovering oversharing risks, securing our Copilot agents, securing our interaction data, governance planning, AI security assessments, and finally, a quick wrap up. It's important as we start to think about how to secure and govern Microsoft 365 Copilot and agents. There's 3 columns here that we want to talk through. We're going to dive into each of these a little bit deeper over the course of the session. First is addressing our oversharing concerns. So this is where we can gain visibility into our overshared content, remediate those excessive permissions, and prevent Copilot and agents from processing our sensitive files. Once we've got oversharing addressed, then we can move on into protecting against data loss and insider risk. This includes getting alerts and reports of risky behavior and AI use, protecting our sensitive files and interactions, and dynamically applying security policies based off of those risky actions. Last but not least, we want to govern AI use to meet regulations and policies. So, this includes things such as inspecting interaction content and audit logs, investigating for compliance and ethical violations, and enforcing lifecycle policies and legal holds. It's important to understand that Microsoft 365 Copilot is built on trust. From the first days that we started rolling out Copilot, one of the things that we had in the forefront is we had trust in place and security in place from day one. So we have Microsoft commitments and controls in place for several different organizations that are out there and several different governing bodies such as GDPR, ISO certifications, etc. We also provide you with tools that will help to manage both Copilot and agents. We're going to walk through several of those today. Let's talk a little bit about the Copilot control system. Okay, so this is a control system that helps with Copilot and agents. There's 3 sections to this. The first is security and governance. So in this area, we talk about data security, AI security, and compliance and privacy. We then have management controls in play. So this is Copilot licensing, agent lifecycle, and customization. And then lastly, management and reporting. So this has to do with readiness and adoption, productivity impact, and our business value and ROI. All of these come together to help you understand all of the things that you need to do or put in place as you start to think about rolling out Copilot and agents. So, what are the top security and governance concerns about generative AI? Right, there's several things that are out there. We have lots and lots of customers that are starting to roll this out, but what are the concerns that are there? Okay, so the first in here is data oversharing and data leaks. So, 80% of leaders have cited leakage of sensitive data as their main concern. How many folks out there have had something come to them from their boss or their leadership or even maybe one of their peers and said, hey, I want to start turning on Copilot, but I have a lot of concerns about, could our sensitive data get into a large language model, or could it get in the wrong hands, or could the wrong people have access to something they're not supposed to? The middle of this is identifying of risky AI use. So 41% of security leaders cited that the identification of risky users based off the queries into AI was one of their top controls they wanted to implement. So this means that we want to enable folks to start utilizing AI, but we also want to make sure that we're identifying where there could be risky AI use, or maybe they're sharing data with a third party that they shouldn't be, or they're doing unethical things potentially with AI. So we want to think through that. And there's some things that we'll show you around how to wrap your head around that. Last on this is AI governance and risk visibility. So 84% want to feel more confident about managing and discovering data input into AI and tools. How many of you are in that boat where you want to get out of this class with more confidence about managing and discovering that data? Otherwise, you wouldn't be here, right? All right, let's move along. So, as we start to talk about this, it is very important to understand how Copilot retrieves the information. Okay, how does it get access to content? There's a 5-step process here. The first piece I want you to really understand is that Copilot only retrieves the information you have access to. Okay, let me say that again because that's the level of importance. Copilot only retrieves access information that you have access to. It doesn't have some super user rights or something like that. It can't go across your entire organization and see absolutely everything just because you asked it. It only has access to the information you have access to as the user. So let's talk about the process. So the orchestration process has 5 steps. First, you submit a prompt. Okay, so let's assume that this prompt is, hey, I need to get a summary of a meeting that I missed. Okay, so the first thing that's going to happen is the orchestrator is going to determine what it needs to answer that prompt. It's going to say, hey, I probably need to look at this meeting that you have asked for and go see if I've got some transcription on it or if there's some documents that were shared or something similar. It's then going to use the Graph API to find that relevant information that you are allowed to access. So, for example, if you weren't part of that meeting and you don't have access to that transcript, we're done. There's nothing that it can go get. However, if you were part of that meeting and you do have access to that transcript, now we're going to take that graph data and we're going to append it to the prompt as you see in step 4. That's then going to enhance that prompt that we're going to send off to the large language model. So now that prompt says, I want to know about the meeting that I didn't attend, and here is the meeting information, and here's the transcript to that meeting, and here are files that are associated to that meeting, for example. Step 5 here is that the LLM or large language model then uses all of that additional data and it uses that to generate a response. So the LLM works through both the prompt that you submitted as well as the appended data that's using Graph together to create a more complete response when we ask for the prompt. So this is how this works, and it's important to understand this a little bit end to end, even at a high level of understanding kind of how Copilot functions. Okay, so let's talk about a complete solution, right? So a lot of things you're going to see in the session today are going to involve how M365 Copilot and agents and Purview work together. So there's two important sections of this. First is the security or being secure. So what does all of that mean? Well, it means that we honor existing permissions. We're going to talk a little bit about that. It means that we protect against data loss and insider risk. It means that we also assess our oversharing risk and we apply our recommended corrections. On the governed side of the house, it means that we're going to do things to support lifecycle policies and audit requirements. It means we're also going to detect and investigate non-compliant and unethical usage. And last, we're going to have guided assistance to remain compliant with our AI regulations. All right, let's jump a little bit into Discover Oversharing. And we're going to use Purview DSPM and SharePoint Advanced Management a little bit here. So we talked about the tools to secure and govern. And one of the things that we're going to work on now is this first column. So how do we address oversharing concerns? Let's take a look. First, as we go through preparation, and this is again part of our strategy, we want to prepare the data for Copilot and agents by ensuring the correct access to files. So it's important to understand, what is oversharing? Well, oversharing is when a Copilot and agent only have access to the individual that the individual user has authorized to access. So they're only going to see the data they have access to. There's no super user or anything like that. The oversharing happens when that employee has access to information beyond what's necessary to do their job. So in other words, they have access to things they shouldn't. Well, what causes that? First is maybe that file was accidentally saved to a location that has broad access permissions. So, for example, maybe I'm working on a document for a project, and instead of saving that in my team site, which has the right permissions on it, maybe I accidentally saved that to a broader site that my entire company has access to. Well, so now the data that I'm working on for that project, anybody that has access to that site now has access to that document. So maybe I accidentally did that. So how do we think about that? The middle here is a user sharing content with someone who should not have access. So the example I can see here, and we see quite frequently, is people go in and they say, "I want to share this file," and then they get a link, and that link will be, "I want to share with everybody within my organization," instead of, "I want to share with people that already have access," or, "I want to share with specific people." So again, that's one of those things that could be in play here. And last is that files do not have access protections on them. So, meaning that we haven't done things to protect those files, the protections are not there, and it means that other folks can have access to them. So, we haven't done anything to lock those down with an ACL or access control list. Okay, so these are a couple of things around oversharing. We're going to talk a little bit about how to address these. So, remediating excessive permissions and applying oversharing protections. Two sections here. So, everything that we're going over is part of the blueprint, and you'll see that detailed guidance in the AKA list down at the bottom of this page. On the left hand side, we talk about preparing. So, first, we need to fix our existing oversharing risks. So, this is 4 parts that we need to take a look at. First, restricting the user and/or Copilot and agent access to risky sites. So if we know that we have sites that are research and development, maybe they're financials, maybe they're HR, maybe there's something that we know we don't need to share. So how do we restrict access to those specific sites? Then we want to talk about acting on policy suggestions to mitigate oversharing risks. We're going to talk a little bit about the DSPM report and some of the policies that come up to help with that. Third, we're going to prevent a Copilot and agents from processing certain sensitive files and from using them in responses as required. So, one of the things that we're going to talk through is the ability to add a security label, a sensitivity label to a file, and then exclude that sensitivity label from anything that Copilot processes. So, if I know, for example, I've got a highly sensitive file, research and development, financials, HR, etc., then I can label it as such and make sure that Copilot never processes it. Last, I can remove organization-wide site access as needed. So I can prevent an entire site from being part of that if I need to go through that process. So those are the steps that we want to think through with repair, and we're going to cover into some of those as part of this session. On the right-hand side, we'll talk a little bit about the operate. So once we've got everything prepared, now we've fixed everything. How do we monitor this to prevent it from going forward? Three main areas here. So first is we want to get notifications when new oversharing occurs with our options for remediation. So people are going to have accidents. They're going to share things they're not supposed to share. How do we monitor that? And how do we react to that as it occurs? We're going to talk through some of those. We're going to further secure sensitive data through file level access controls and DLP or data loss prevention policies. So we'll talk through some of the things that we do there. Last, we're going to talk about improving Copilot and agent responses by archiving or deleting unneeded content. If you've got, say, 20 years of data that's out there, well, Copilot can reason over that 20 years of data depending on what you have access to. So how do we make that faster? Well, we use retention policies. So if we've got files that are out there, maybe we only need to keep 5 years or 10 years or 20 years or 15 years, whatever that might be. But talking through how do we archive some of that legacy stuff. Okay. The first piece of this is how do we identify and mitigate risk related to AI usage? So I talked a little bit about this DSPM report or Data Security Posture Management for AI. So what this does is it proactively strengthens the data security to help prevent incidents like oversharing, leakage, and unethical use. So on the first column here, we talk about discovery. So the ability to use these reports to discover our data security, safety, and compliance risks in using our reports and our oversharing assessments that are out there. Some of these are right out of the box. We just need to go in and get them turned on. The middle section is protecting our sensitive data from overexposure with suggested policies, and we can use our one-click application of sensitivity labels. So again, we want to look at the data that we know is sensitive, and we want to get it marked appropriately and get the right labels and things on that. Last, we want to talk about governing AI usage for non-compliant and unethical usage and get recommendations on enforcing those policies. So this would be the case where you've got folks that are doing things that are threatening, or maybe money laundering or stock manipulation, anything that's around that, or maybe it's simply just they're sharing data out to a third-party AI, and we want to take a look at that as well. So these are three areas that we want to take a look at, and we're going to look into how we can help in each of these sections. Okay. I've talked a lot about sensitivity labels, and one of the things that we use to do a lot of this is a sensitivity label. Okay, so this is part of Purview, and so the sensitivity label spans the entire data estate. So it's a representation of your information taxonomy. It describes the priority assigned to the categories of sensitive information. On the top hand side of the right graphic, you will see public, general, confidential, and restricted. These are the four labels that are out of the box for you. These labels can be applied in two different ways. One is a content label. So that means I'm applying the label directly to the document. Maybe this is a Word document, a PowerPoint deck, an Excel file, Power BI report, or could even be Azure data. This is going to give me encryption and also visual markings on that document. This can also be applied either manually by the user, or we can apply it automatically based off the classifications. On the right-hand side, we talk about container labels. So this is where I've identified an entire SharePoint site, a Teams channel, or a group, and I want to apply the label to that entire collection of documents or collection of things. So this gives me access control, privacy settings, and conditional access. This can be applied manually by site and team or group owners. So this means that I've identified an entire area that I want to be protected or labeled. As we talk about sensitivity labels, it's important to understand how they work with Copilot. Okay, so Copilot Conversation inherits the sensitivity label of the referenced files. So, what this means is that I have the ability, they inherit the most restrictive sensitivity labels from the references used to formulate the response. What does all of that mean? Well, it means if I'm asking Copilot for a prompt and the data that it needs to get the prompt is marked confidential, as you see in the graphic, that now means that prompt in conversation is also marked confidential. So we're protecting your documents end to end. So if you've got something in one, you've got something in all the way from the start to the finish. One of the other things I want to talk about is the fact that Copilot generated content inherits the sensitivity label of referenced files. So, what this means in the example you see on the screen is that we've created a Word document and we're referencing a document to generate this content that is marked as a sensitivity label of confidential anyone, as you can see up in the top right hand corner of the page. This means that that generated content now also inherits that label. So the generated content that you've asked for via prompt will also be marked as confidential anyone. This is important because it maintains that those markings and the labels across the entire engagement with Copilot, whether you are referencing things as you get answers to questions or prompts, or you're generating net new. The next section to talk about is, now we've talked about all these sensitivity labels. Let's talk about how we can see that they're in play. And this is, again, showing you what we're doing, showing you how this works. So sensitivity labels are visible in Copilot chat. So in this case, in the picture that you see, we can see that we've asked for it to summarize a document. That document is marked as confidential anyone unrestricted via a sensitivity label, and our reference shows that. So our reference shows right underneath the name of the title, confidential anyone unrestricted. So again, we're marking it, carrying forward those labels and markings into the results, and we're also showing that in the reference, so we can actually see that visible within the citation of the document itself. All right, let's talk a little bit about default sensitivity labels. So one of the things we talked about was applying sensitivity labels to our folders and our folder structure and our sites. So in this example, we're looking at the Financial Planning 2023 site, and we've marked this document library as confidential. So what that means is that any document that's created net new in that site is also going to be marked as confidential. So what this does is, if I'm working on something with finance or research and development, HR, et cetera, all of our normal stuff that we have higher sensitivity to, that I can mark the sites in the document libraries correctly. Also, my Teams channels, things of that nature, all those things can be marked with the appropriate sensitivity. And then as I'm creating new documents in there, they'll maintain that level of sensitivity that's there. All right, we've talked about all these things, so let me show you a little bit about how Purview DSPM and data risk management works. So we're going to watch a real short video that kind of goes through some of the default reporting that's out there and let you kind of see all these things that we've been talking about in action.
To help address oversharing, we introduce data risk assessment, part of Purview Data Security Posture Management for AI, allowing security teams to scan files containing sensitive data and identifying data repositories such as SharePoint sites with overly permissive user access. It provides visibility into overshared content, risk assessment, remediation actions, and detailed reports. The default assessment runs weekly on the top 100 sites based on usage, giving you a view into whether your content is scanned for sensitive info, sensitivity label on data, and how items are shared. You can click onto each site to get detailed information and take remediation actions on oversharing, or export the table for further investigations. With our new feature, on-demand classification, you can either rescan items that are already scanned against new classifiers to ensure all content is properly classified, or scan items that are not scanned for sensitive info. To limit Microsoft 365 Copilot from accessing sites while you address its permissions and sharing, you can either block Copilot from processing files labeled with a specific sensitivity label using Purview's DLP for Copilot, or restrict all items from Copilot's access using SharePoint Advanced Management's restricted content discovery. Microsoft 365 Copilot honors and inherits sensitivity labels in its conversations. Be sure to set up sensitivity labels and apply them to files through default labels, auto-labeling, and default site and library level labels. You can also click View of Items, which takes the user to Data Explorer, in which they can see the content of the file with the right permissions and filter by specific SIT or sensitivity label. To help prevent out-of-date or irrelevant responses, set up Purview Data Lifecycle Management's retention policies to retain and then delete unused files according to your organization's retention requirements. Lastly, routinely run site access review with SharePoint Advanced Management and delegate to site owners to review how content is being shared, and access review with Microsoft Entra to make sure anyone who no longer needs access to resources has their access removed. To address internal oversharing for your Microsoft 365 Copilot deployment with Purview and SharePoint Advanced Management, check out our full blueprint guidance at aka.ms/copilot/oversharing.
All right, that concludes the video and gives you kind of an idea of what those DSPM reports. All right, so far, just to recap, we've taken a look at all the different things that are available to us from security. We've looked a little bit at the DSPM reports, and now what we're going to do is actually go in and create a custom DSPM report. So we're going to walk through the lab environment next, and we'll go through step by step of what this looks like. You can follow along with me if you'd like. You're also welcome to do these at the end of the session if you would like to do that. Most folks travel along as we go, and you'll learn through these pieces. Okay, so let's jump into the lab environment. The first thing that you're going to see is the login screen. So you'll see instructions over on your right-hand side, and the left-hand side is our interaction that we're going through. So first we need to put in a password. Easiest way to do these is if you see something on the right hand in green, then you can just click on it. So what'll happen is it'll actually type it into the machine for you, and then we're just going to click this little arrow to get logged in. Each of the labs that you're going to go through as part of this session are going to be over here in this instruction set. So you'll see each breakdown with major title headers on each thing that we're going to be working through as we go through the rest of the session. You'll also see a resources tab over here. That resources tab is going to have your credentials to get you logged in when we start getting into those sections. So we'll talk through that very shortly. First thing on this lab, okay, so we're going to launch Edge real quick. So we can do that from up here at the top. Just double click. And then I'm going to go to HTTPS purview.microsoft.com. Okay, first logins that I'm going to get here is logging in as the admin. So I'm going to click back on my resources tab. I'm going to click on my administrative username right here. Again, I don't want to have to type all this in, so I'm just going to click on it. Then we're going to click next. Then it's going to ask us for a password. We're going to click on administrative password right here below it. And then we're going to click sign in. And we'll just save not now. Don't want to save in this pop-up. And we do want to stay signed in, so this is a yes. Okay, this will get us into Purview. So the first thing you're going to see in here is some of the welcome to Purview prompts. Again, this is a brand new tenant, so you're going to see all the normal stuff as if you were, just starting this up for the very first time. So first thing in here is we're just going to click on the Get Started icon, and we'll click on this first X. So you can, if you're doing this the first time, you can go through here and click through these. You're welcome to do that as you go through the labs, where you're working through those dialog boxes. But I'm going to get us right into the solutions here. Okay, so the first thing you see in section number 2 is we want to click on the Solutions tab on the left. This is where all of your different solutions around Purview are going to be homed. So inside here, we're talking about DSPM. So we're going to go down here on the left, and we're going to click on DSPM for AI. Once we get inside this report, okay, you see over here we're doing some setup. This is all normal because we're first getting started. So it's actually going in and activating the auditing that's in here, getting those pieces up and running for us, building some of our default pieces. One of the things to keep in mind is that the first time that we're in here triggers us to run our default reports. So in the video, you saw some of the things in the default report. When you're coming in this in your own tenant, you'll also, if you've never been in here before, it'll kick off that default report, give you at least some initial data, and then you also can create some of the custom reports and custom assessments, which is what we're going to do. Okay, so in the DSPM for AI, we're going to go over here to the left and click on Data Risk Assessments. So inside here, once that default report completes, you'll see additional data in here. Right now, all that we see is just the initial data up at the top, which doesn't have a lot of stuff in it. And then we also see some of the things around the custom assessments and things of that nature. So when you will eventually see your default data, as you saw in the video, will be in here. So this assessment, it does take up to 4 days to populate that default report. You coming into this area is what kicks that off. And then 4 days later, you'll have the default. The default assessment then runs every week on basically on your top 100 SharePoint sites based off of the number of times that that site is accessed. And you see that step number 6 in our steps here. Step number 7. So we're going to jump in and create a custom assessment. Okay, so we're going to scroll down here and we're going to click on this Create Custom Assessment button down here. And we're just going to give this a name. So you can name this whatever you want. So first assessment. And I always like to caution people, make sure you give these a good description. So as you're going through this, think of like, if I'm not the next person that's going to see this, how will that person that's coming in here know what I'm doing? This was a test for my lab. And this can be whatever you want. Just make it meaningful. Okay. Once we get to here, we're just going to click on next. Got specific users that you want to target for this report or this assessment, then we can do that. That's what we're going to go through in the next steps. So we're going to click on include specific here, and then we're going to click on this add users box. This lets us pick out the users that we want to be in this assessment, that we're going to go look at the data that they have access to. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to type in Adele. She's one of our test users that you guys, if you've seen any of our other tenants, she's been in here before. And then I'm going to hit return on my keyboard, and that will give me Adele Vance. So I'm just going to select out here to the side and click on add. So that gets her added into the users that we want this to run against. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is click on next down here at the bottom, and you could repeat this for multiple users, obviously, or groups if you wanted to. Once we get inside here, now we get to determine what are the sources that we want to scan. So maybe there's specific things that you want to scan. Maybe there are OneDrives or specific OneDrives that you want to scan. So you see the default here is SharePoint. If I click into this, I can turn that on or off. If I click over on actions on the right, I can pick specific sites that I want this to apply to. So either of those is perfectly fine. We're going to leave this to all for right now. And then I'm also going to turn on OneDrive because I want to take a look at the data that's in her OneDrive as well. So I'm saying scan everything that's out there that Adele has access to, look at her SharePoint access as well as things that she has in her OneDrive. Okay, so once I get this done, I'm going to click on next. You get a quick review. So review of what you've selected. So we see here, we've got one user selected. We've put our name in, our description. We've picked all of our data sources. So we're just going to click on save and run. Okay, and then you get a confirmation page here. So data assessment successfully created, and you'll see the scanning of the data can take up to 48 hours. So you will get results inside the pane, but this is it. That's how easy this is. So if I want to create a quick custom assessment, start looking at that data set, and then once I have these reports, I can do all the things that we saw in the video. So I can start to take a look at the report and figure out what things are out there, what are things I need to remediate. So many times when I think through this with customers, I think of it as the aspect of, maybe I want to look at all of my C levels first, or my executives, or maybe my HR team, or my finance team, or whatever that might be. You can pick how you want these assessments to run, but you can make these assessments custom and fine tuned. Okay, so once we're done here, we're just going to click on done. And that takes us back to our main page. You will see that custom assessment is in progress now. And again, this is not going to get done during the course of the lab, but it is something if you're running this in your own tenant, you'll see this go from in progress to complete within a couple of days. Is typically what we see. And that concludes this lab. All right, for this section, we're going to talk about securing Copilot agents from grounding data to interactions. So now as we're moving through this, we're moving into that center column. So we've already talked about addressing our oversharing concerns. We've showed you how to use some of the reports that are out there and some of the data risk assessments. Now we're going to move over to protecting against data loss and insider risk. So protecting against data loss and insider risk. Well, what is data loss and insider risk? Data loss and insider risk may occur without Copilot agent use. The productivity benefits of these tools create opportunities for these risks to happen with less effort. Data loss is when unsafe or inappropriate sharing, transfer, or use of sensitive content occurs. And on the right-hand side, insider risk involves users misusing their authorized access to cause harm. This misuse may be either intentional or intentional. Okay, that's great. We've defined it. Well, let's talk about what causes it. So what causes it down in the bottom left-hand side? So Copilot or an agent creates documents that aren't protected by default because the inputs weren't protected. So this means that they're not doing things with our sensitivity labels or anything of that nature, or maybe they're just creating documents that aren't going into the correct places. Second is using Copilot or an agent to access or summarize sensitive data in a way that violates usage guidelines. So this would be if they're violating those usage guidelines and they're summarizing that sensitive data. The third is a user's credentials are compromised, and the bad actor then uses Copilot or an agent to access that sensitive data. Again, if that user's creds are compromised, now they've got access to that user's documents. That should make sense. And then last is if we have an employee that has resigned and wants to keep company IP, and they use either Copilot or an agent to quickly find the most relevant content. So, as we know, the power of Copilot to be able to go get a quick summary of all the documents that are important to us on a specific topic makes life very easy here. All right, on this page, we're going to talk a little bit more about Microsoft Purview, which is our unified approach to secure and govern your data in the era of AI. You have three columns here. Purview works in data security, data governance, and data compliance. And all of these have some bearing into terms of how we think about AI. So the shared capabilities value here is we have access to data map, connectors, classification, labels, audit, and visibility across all of these different areas when we're starting to use Purview with respect to AI. So Purview, it not only secures the prompts and the responses that the users have with AI apps, it also secures and governs the knowledge source or the grounding data for AI apps and agents. So what you're seeing here on the left-hand side is we're grounding the knowledge source that's out here. So M365, Microsoft 365, and beyond, and we're grounding that into the agent, and then we're also grounding the interaction. So you've got the ability, the interaction data, which is our prompts and our responses. So we talked about this already from the respective of creating new content via Copilot, but we're going to talk about this with the respect to the agent. So in this case, the Copilot agent conversation inherits the sensitivity label of the reference data. This is no different than what we talked about in the prior section. So what this means is if I've created an agent and that agent is accessing documents or different things, it is going to inherit the most restrictive sensitivity label from the references. So when it's going out and it's looking at things, it's getting responses back. It works the exact same way as we saw it before when we're creating new things just from Copilot Chat. So, how do we think about securing all this? So, there's a lot of stuff on here, and this is really not to overwhelm you, but it's to give you an idea of things that we can do to secure agents in Microsoft 365 with Purview. So, we talk about discovering, turning on audit, which we already walked through with the data risk assessment, looking at oversharing, those types of things. We're talking about protecting our grounding data, so protecting sensitive info and grounding data, putting sensitivity labels into SharePoint into the right things, reducing our stale data, restricting access of files from Copilot. And then in protecting our interactions, this is where we talk about DLP or data loss and insider risk. And then lastly, we talk about govern and govern interactions. So how do we use things with DLM, detecting inappropriate behaviors and things of that nature. All right, so our next section here, we're going to talk a little bit about securing our grounding data. Okay, so when a user asks Copilot to summarize the Obsidian merger file, even though the user has permission to the file, Copilot will decline to summarize it. And so this is basically meaning that the DLP is in place and it prevents that sensitive data. So that file is marked, it has an organizational policy in place around it. And we're preventing access. So even though the user has access to it, Copilot can't use that data to generate a response. Next, to ensure that files containing sensitive content are used appropriately, data security admins can configure DLP or data loss prevention for AI policies to prevent Copilot or agents from using certain labeled documents as grounding data to generate summaries or responses. For example, confidential legal documents with highly specific language that could lead to improper guidance if summarized by an agent, or something that's marked as internal only, documents that shouldn't be used to generate content that can be shared outside of the organization. Here, for example, the data security admins create a DLP rule to prevent M365 Copilot from using files labeled with Obsidian merger to generate responses. So, what you're seeing on the screen here is we've gone in and created a rule, and that rule has a sensitivity label in there. We're going to work through this in just a second in the lab, so you'll get to see this live. All right, in the lab section of this, as I said, this is exactly where we're going to start to do some things with the DLP or data loss prevention, and you'll start to see some of that in the lab environment. Okay, for this lab, we're going to come back in and we're going to start looking at data loss prevention for Copilot. So if you've not closed out of your browser window and you come back in, you'll be right where we left at the data risk assessments. If you've already closed it out, super easy, open the Edge back up, go to purview.microsoft.com. What we're going to do is click on the Solutions tab up here at the top. This is step number 2. And then we're going to click on Data Loss Prevention. This is going to carry us into this section. And inside here, we're going to click on Policies up at the very top. Okay. Inside policies, we're going to go ahead and create a new policy. So we see there's a bunch of default policies that are already out here. And we're just going to click new on this little plus arrow. And we're going to start walking through creation of the policy. Okay, so first we got to choose what type of data we want to protect. We're going to protect data that's stored in our connected resources. Okay, so we're going to click on next here. And then we're starting with a template or a custom policy. So in this case, this is going to be custom. So we're going to scroll down and we're going to pick the custom category down here at the bottom. You're also then going to click on custom policy. Okay, so once we've got all those in place, now we're going to click on next. Now in this dialog box, you can give your policy a name. This is step number 6. So you can just call this custom policy, test policy, whatever makes you happy. Perfectly fine here. And then in your description, we want to create a meaningful description. This is my custom policy. Obviously, make this make more sense. And the goal here of these descriptions and names is so that people that come behind you can understand what this policy is meant to do. So put a little bit of thought into this to make your life easier for your fellow admins. Okay, so inside here, we're going to click on next after we've got our description and our name in. And we're not going to do anything with the admin assigning admin units. So we're just going to use the full directory here in this case. So just click next here. And then we're going to start to look at where do we want to apply this policy. Okay, so you'll see a bunch of different locations that are already selected. We're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom and you will select Microsoft 365 Copilot. Now, what you'll see when you do that is that it unchecks everything else. You can only have policies that either apply to Copilot or to other things, but not both. So a policy can't apply to, say, Teams, for example, and also Copilot. You would have to create one for Copilot, one for Teams if you wanted to cover both of those. Okay, so now that we've got this selected, we're going to click next down here at the bottom. And then we are going to, in the define policy settings, we are going to create or customize advanced DLP rules. Click next. And now we're in the meat of this. So now we're going to start customizing our advanced DLP rules in here. So first thing we're going to do is click on create a rule. So this is step number 10. Back to our normal dialog box, create a rule, call it whatever you want. I'm going to just call this my rule. And description, this is my rule. You can do whatever you want to inside here, but also keep in mind, these should be meaningful for whoever's coming behind you. Okay, so now we're going to scroll down and you'll see the conditions. So what are the conditions that must be met for this policy to be applied? Okay, so we're going to click on add condition down here. This is step number 12. And then we are going to select add condition and content contains. Okay, here you can name the group if you want, it doesn't matter. Underneath this content contains area, you're going to click on add. And then underneath add, you're going to click on sensitivity labels. Okay, this is then going to pop out and say, what sensitivity label do you want to use? So you can use any of these that you want. The most common that we see is that for folks to use that highly confidential. So we're going to go down here and click on highly confidential, and you can select multiples if you want. I'm just going to click this one. Click on add here. And then now back in the main dialog box, we're going to scroll down a little bit more. And we're going down to the actions. So now we've got our highly confidential, and we're going to go to actions, and we're going to click on add an action. This is step number 15. So one of the things that we want to do as part of this is we want to prevent Copilot from processing the content. So what this is saying is anytime that Copilot is involved in a document that is marked with a highly confidential sensitivity label, it will not process that document. Okay, so we've got the restrict policy down here at the bottom. And then we're going to scroll down, take a look at our reporting. So you can turn on reporting however you want. If you want it to be, alert the admin or send an email, all those are possible. We're going to click on save here. And now we're going to see our policy settings down here. This is just an overview of what we have. So we're seeing I've got highly confidential selected. And then I want to send an alert to the administrator, and we're looking at all the data that's on there. Okay, so we're going to review this real quick. And we also want to turn on policy immediately. So you'll see the status over here for that. Run policy in simulation mode, turn on policy immediately, leave policy turned off. So you can simulate this if you want to. Most of these I turn on immediately, or if I'm simulating, I want to see what type of hits it's going to get, what types of things it might have blocked, so I can kind of fine tune it a little bit, and then turn on policy immediately. So we're going to turn on policy immediately as I stated before. So we'll click next here. Then we get our good old review and finish page that tells us everything we're doing. Here's my role name. Here's my policy name. Here's where it's going. And then we want to turn it on. So we're going to click on submit. And that'll take just a second to run. And now we see we have a new policy created. So just in those few steps, what we've now done is we've made it where anything that we tell our users to mark highly confidential, we're automatically going to take that out of Copilot processing. So you can create your own sensitivity label for this. You can use one of the defaults. Sometimes maybe you would create a policy that just says exclude Copilot or something like that. But this now gives you the ability to guide your users on marking documents or marking specific sites with that specific sensitivity label, and now Copilot won't process those. Okay, that's the end of this lab. Let's go back to the deck. All right, let's talk a little bit now about secure interaction data. So, how do we insider risk management and risky AI policy? Let's jump into some of these things. Okay, so insider risk management can help security teams with appropriate permissions to detect risky activities. This could be such as a departing employee entering an unusual number of Copilot prompts containing sensitive data, which deviates from their past activity patterns. So they're letting go from the company and they go into Copilot. They start looking for everything they can. Security teams can then effectively detect and respond to these potential incidents to minimize the negative impact. For example, in this screenshot, we can see that a user conducts a risky sequence in Copilot. They remove the labels of sensitive files before asking Copilot to summarize it. So the Copilot response won't inherit the label, and the user can cover up their path to exfiltrate the sensitive data. Insider risk management can effectively detect and alert on this type of risk. So before we talked about how to put the labels in place, and we talked about the fact that anytime that we're asking for a piece of data that has that label, the prompt would also contain that label. So what you're seeing here is a sequence where the user has gone in sequence number 4 in the right here, the user's actually gone in and they've removed those labels off of those files. So the intention here would be that they're going to take those files, they're going to run Copilot against them real quick and gather that data, whereas it might not have been marked appropriately before to be externally shared or maybe saved off or whatever that might be. So once a user is detected as a high risk in insider risk management, a combination of adaptive protection and purview with conditional access in intra can dynamically assign a stricter conditional access policy to that user. For example, it can block the user from accessing Copilot, preventing them from inquiring about more sensitive information. So what you're seeing right here on the screen is that they have a certain level, and then those levels, if they're in an elevated state or a moderate state, we can take some actions upon that. So maybe if we detect that they, in the example prior, they've reduced a bunch of the labels, they've taken labels out, they've done a lot of things at once, maybe we automatically put adaptive protection in play and we turn up their conditional access policy. So maybe we're making sure they're within the 4 walls of our building, they're on VPN, or we just turn off Copilot for them because we see something that we think is going to be a little risky. So this is one of those things. This is the box that they would get. So this is the case where an insider risk management has detected a user as high risk, and it's actually gone in and it's blocked them from accessing Copilot. So it says, your sign-in was successful, but doesn't meet the criteria. So this is one of the things that they would see. So in this case, we're actually blocking Copilot from this user. They can't get to that. They can't see that. Okay, so let's jump in and set this up inside the lab. All right, back into the lab. So if you didn't close out of the browser window, you're going to be exactly where you were before inside data loss prevention and underneath policies. If you did close out, no big deal. Open up Edge, go back to purview.microsoft.com. I'll get you right back in here. So inside here, we're going to click on Solutions. We're going to click on Insider Risk Management on the left-hand side. And then we're going to go into the Policies tab. This will take just a second to load up. Once we get inside here, we're going to go in and click on plus for create policy and then click on custom policy. And then now we're on step 6. So step 6, we're going to choose a template. In this case, we're going to scroll down and we're going to grab risky AI usage here and click on next. And then always a friendly name. Again, name this something that makes sense. So that your fellow coworkers understand what these are. Click on next here. And then we're going to use all users, groups, and adaptive scopes. So just leave that the way it is. Click on next. And then we're not going to be excluding any users or groups. We want to include everybody. So if we wanted to exclude certain people or groups, this is what that would do. We're just going to click next here. And so now we're on step 10, which is deciding whether we want to prioritize content. So this would be if there's certain things I want to prioritize, I can add those in here. I don't want to prioritize anything, so I'm just going to select that. I'm going to click on next here. And then I'm going to see what triggering events that I want. So in this case, I want to use all triggering events that are available to me. So do a select all here. And you'll see some other, you can scroll through and look at what the events are. And you can go configure these if you want to. The yellow boxes will tell you what you need to configure if you want to configure each of these. So I'm just going to take the select all here, click on next. And then in this one, we're going to use our built-in thresholds. So next is fine here. And then now we're looking at our indicators. So you will have to click on turn on indicators up here at the top the first time you come in. And then we'll select everything that we see in there. So you'll have a select all box in there. And then we also want to take a look at generative AI apps. And we also want to look at the Copilot experiences. We want to make sure select all is in here and we have all of these selected. So this is step number 14. Okay, once we've got all these selected, we're going to go ahead and click next. And then you will see detection options. So everything should be selected inside here. We're going to click next again. And then choose our thresholds. So you'll have to click on turn on analytics inside here to get our thresholds. This will take just a second. And then we will also want to make sure we're applying thresholds provided by Microsoft. So these are, it's going to take 48 hours to get through the scans and get the thresholds built for you. And then it's going to be the ones that are provided. You also can come in here and customize your own if you want to. So if you want to change what those threshold values are, I always recommend starting with the ones, the defaults. And then if you need to adjust it, you certainly can. Okay, once we get that, we're going to click next here. And then, as always, you've seen so far several times, we're going to review those settings, take a look at what we've selected, and click on submit. So that gets us a policy, and you'll see it does take up to 24 hours before the matches start showing up in the alerts. So again, what we've done is we've now created a policy that if one of our users starts to go in and remove sensitivity labels or move those to a lesser sensitivity, we'll actually get some alerts on that. That's what you're seeing inside here. So this is another way to keep ourselves safe as we go through that. And that's the end of this lab. So you can click on done. All right, so now we're going to move over in and talk about governance planning. So we've talked about a bunch of different tools that are in play. We've talked about oversharing concerns. We've talked about protecting against insider risk and data loss. And now we're going to talk about how to govern AI use to meet our regulations and policies. So what is Copilot agent and agent governance? Well, governance supports Copilot and agent use in adherence to organizational policies. It's enforced by a set of compliance and management controls, and it includes the option to include interactions in existing compliance management or legal processes alongside M365 content. Why do we need this? Well, we can configure admin controls to support compliance with specific AI regulatory framework. This is such as the EU AI Act or NIST AI Risk Management Framework. It limits our exposure from misuse by identifying issues early and mitigating them quickly. It increases our response quality by limiting access to outdated information. And lastly, it keeps or deletes Copilot and agent generated content according to your risk management policies. So we can audit interactions, we can enforce lifecycle policies, and we also have access to legal holds. So in the first column here, what you're seeing is the AI interaction. So Copilot in a Word audit entry. We see in the audit log, date, time, user, detailed event data, and more. So these interactions, Copilot, we can audit these interactions to assess more detailed log information. Into center column, we can enforce retention and deletion policies for both interactions and meeting recordings and transcripts. So this means that maybe I want to keep those Copilot interactions for 6 months and then I want to purge them. It also means that maybe I want to set a different policy around my meeting recordings and my transcripts. Maybe I only want to keep those for 90 days and then I want those gone as well. I have the ability to do that. Lastly, on the third column, we can include a Copilot and agent prompts and our responses in a legal hold. So if we're doing a legal hold on a user or a group of users, we have the ability to bring those Copilot and agent prompts and responses inside that. So we can also talk about investigating. So investigating for compliance and ethical violations. So we can receive alert if a possible compliance or ethical violation occurs. We can start an investigation into that. We also have the ability to perform an admin cert for litigation or for an investigation and include Copilot and agent generated content. And lastly, we can assess and track adherence to regulatory frameworks. So you see three that are listed here. So Microsoft provides Purview Compliance Manager, which offers detailed guidance to help implement controls for M365 Copilot. So what you're seeing here is a detailed log information of our detailed log. On the right-hand side, you can see where the user is accessing Copilot and the types of data that they're asking for and getting back. In this next piece, we start to talk about some of the retention policies and data compliance controls to retain those log interactions. So we can detect and investigate non-compliant usage and conduct e-discovery investigations. So in this screenshot, we're highlighting the Purview communications compliance controls. Those compliance controls offer machine learning powered classifiers that can help to detect non-compliant use of Copilot. For example, we can see here that Diego, a sales rep at Contoso, is asking Copilot to help cover up his intent to bribe his clients by rephrasing a message for him. Microsoft Purview provides ready-to-use classifiers that go beyond the mere keyboard detection and understanding the context of the content. This gives scenarios like gift giving, unauthorized disclosure, regulatory collusion, money laundering, stock manipulation, and more. So in the screenshot here, you can actually see where he's asking, hey, can you help me reword this? Inside here, what you will see is the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. So it has provided recommended actions for the EU Act assessment. So we're taking an assessment of what's out there, and we're actually providing some actions based off of that act. So we can look at that specific regulation, and we can look at what improvements that we need to make. That's what you're seeing on the screenshot here. Okay, let's move over. We're going to jump right into the lab around creating a communication compliance policy. All right, so back in the lab, again, you'll be in the same place you left it. So if you're inside of risk management or anywhere else, you can close out, reopen. If you close it out, go back to purview.microsoft.com. In this case, we're going to click on solutions again. And this time we're going to click on communication compliance. Once we're inside here, just as before, we're going to click on policies. You may get some pop-up boxes in here. Just click on the X's to close those out as you get them. That's all normal because it might be the first time you've been in here. So we're going to scroll down to the bottom. We're going to click on create policy, and we're going to click on custom policy down here at the bottom. This is step 6. Again, name the policy. So again, make a meaningful name. Policy default communication policy, and click on next. And then we're going to have our users and groups. We're going to use everybody. So we wanted to process against everyone in the organization. If you wanted to select individual users or adaptive scopes, then this is where you would do that. And then if there's people you wanted to exclude from the policy, you can do that here. Last but not least, we're going to put in who our reviewers are. So click on this box, type in the word admin or the name of your admin if you're in your own tenant. In this case, we're going to click on the MOD administrator, and then we're going to click next. This is who can review those communications. Okay, so then we're going to choose our locations to detect in. You should have several boxes that are already checked here. We're going to go inside generative AI. So step 9, click on the plus generative AI. Make sure inside here the M365 Copilot is selected. And then once that's in here, click next, add, and then next. Okay, so now you're going to see what are the conditions. So what are the conditions that we want to match? So this is on step 10. So we're going to click on add condition, and then we're going to match trainable classifiers. So you can pick, you can see there's a bunch of selections in here around where it came from, who the recipient domain was, who the sender was. Did you put a word in there? Did it have sensitive info types? We're just going to include trainable classifiers for today. Okay, and then once you're inside here on step 11, click on add, and then click on trainable classifiers. Inside this list, you'll see the 20 that are out of the box. And I'm just going to select all of them. You can pick and choose which ones you want. So if there's certain things that you want in here, you can take a look at what's in this list, and you can pick what's in there. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do an add there. And then we will click next. Standard review page here. So if I scroll up, I see my review and finish. Shows me everything I'm doing. Shows me who my reviewers are, what locations I'm in. And then last but not least, I'm going to click on create policy. That's going to take a little bit to run, and then you'll see policy created, and you can click on done here. Okay, so that's the end of this lab. All right, so back to the deck, and now we're in the section around our AI security assessment. Okay, so we've gone through a lot of different things today. We've created a lot of different policies that are out there to help to protect our data and things of that nature. How do I get started? Well, so one of the things here is you have the ability to secure and govern M365 Copilot and agents with confidence. So what you'll see here on this page is first preparing that environment, discovering the privacy risk with comprehensive visibility, protecting against those threats, and governing. So all the things that we've kind of already talked about across the course of the session. Down at the bottom, you can take the security for AI assessment. What this does is it provides you gaining clarity on how the posture looks in your environment. It identifies your key gaps. You'll get some tailored recommendations in there. You can download that full report, share those findings, and align your team. And then you can keep that momentum going with expert guidance and next steps. So, how do you do this? Well, you can take a picture of this QR code, or you can go to aka.ms/S4 AI assessment. Again, aka.ms/S4 AI assessment. Both of these things will take you into that security assessment and let you go through and work through that. We're not going to do that in the class because it doesn't, this applies directly to your information. So, you want to do this on your own and applying it to your own environment versus the lab environments that you have here. Okay, so let's talk about some of the key takeaways. So we've made it to the end here. I want to share some resources with you that I want you to take some pictures of, or at least start to write down. The first is we talked about that deployment blueprint. So this is some things you can work through with the deployment blueprint, aka.ms/copilot/oversharing. You also have a couple of different other QR codes in here. We talked a little bit about the things that we can do to get started, and some of those skills and things that are out there. All of these are part of that success kit that's out there, so you can see the success kit. Download that and start to use through that. That will help you also with adoption. If you need to go through the adoption pieces of this, and you're looking at user adoption and not just the security aspects. And then last, getting access to the AI tool resources. So this QR code will take you out to our landing page, and that gives you access to all the different decks and things that are on the tour. We'll pause for a second here for Q&A and give a couple minutes left. And other than that, thank you so much for coming and being part of this session. Last but not least, you can go in and download the QR code for this tour presentation directly. This is your link to get to that. With that, thank you very much. That's the end of the session.